All right, let's resume. So we'll get into our talks for the morning after our excellent keynote. So we've got, just like yesterday, we've got the first half of the session now with 3 talks. We'll then take a break for about 15 minutes. And we then have an hour with further talks on the societal impact of research infrastructures. So in the first half of this session, we will hear from South African colleagues. So we have Simpiwe Madlonga here with us, who is the coordinator for science engagement at the South African Radio Astronomy Observatory, which is the organization that manages radio astronomy facilities in South Africa, including the Meerkat telescope, which is a precursor to the SK telescope. Simpiwe is trained in geology, geophysics, and has a science communication experience for more than 10 years. We'll also hear from Bonita de Swart about another socioeconomic impact study that was done in South Africa. Bonita also works at the South African Radio Astronomy Observatory. She did her initial training in astronomy at Rutgers University in the US and completed a PhD in 2009, followed by a postdoc fellowship at the South African Astronomical Observatory. And our third speaker before the break to talk about a socioeconomic impact study of Diamond Light Source will be Sarah Tridgell, who is Deputy Head of Communications for Diamond Light Source, which is the UK's national synchrotron facility. She's got 16 years experience working in science communication, covering all aspects of the communications portfolio. And she oversees communications programs for information management, publications, and scientific conferences. So I will be quite strict on time. So over to you, Simpiwe, if you want to come over here. Wrong screen.
Okay, let's just
Yeah,
go
stop
down.
share.
Okay, it should.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah,
Okay.
it should be fine. There we go.
Okay.
Good day, everyone. My name is Simpiwe, as has been said, and I come from the South African Radio Astronomy Observatory. And I will be talking about the impact of international scientific research projects, a South African perspective based on the Meerkat radio telescope as a precursor to the SKA. I must mention from the onset that I'll be touching on the impact element only as an entry point to my main message, which will become apparent as I proceed. And I need to then mention this element of positionality. So I am an employee of SEREO, Science Engagement Coordinator, but happen to be here in the UK currently on a Chevening scholarship from the UK Foreign Commonwealth Development Office, and am part of a program with the University of London where I wanted to remove myself from that role of science engagement and look at this impact, and hence you see the value in the brackets so that one could enhance and enrich how we actually do this public awareness. Let me go quickly through that. That is just to show you the flow of what I'll be talking about. And so let's get right into it. When I saw the title of the conference, PARI, 2 meanings came to me in this sense. The first one is, of course, us raising this awareness with the various publics, as was emphasized yesterday by Frank. As I was preparing for this conference, it is something that one has been conscious of, that indeed we deal with a multitude of different people and contexts. And I'll explain that even further in our context of South Africa as it relates to the Meerkat itself. And more importantly, I believe, because we are the ones doing this public awareness, this science engagement. We also need to look internally. I believe it was Terry yesterday, one of the sessions where he posed a question and or a challenge to say, as a community of practice here, are we doing perhaps more of patting ourselves on the back in terms of what we feel and believe we're doing and achieving against this inward look of, are we indeed achieving it? Do we have areas that we should be improving? And are we alive to the different contexts of the areas where we operate? And so as I go further in this presentation, I'll highlight these in the context of South Africa. Yes, it is a country that hosts the infrastructure, but it happens to also be a developing country. And it has, in its context, quite a sizable investment toward this project. And then these publics that we engage with also have these expectations or these needs that need to be met as we engage with them. And we need to be conscious that indeed they're not empty vessels. Whenever we do the work that we do, we are not just pouring into them. And hence I mentioned tabula rasa there, where we talk of this notion of this blank mind or this blank canvas, which is not the case. A lot of these people do have preconceived ideas, even those who may be trained in science in various ways have different associations and understandings, and indeed, as I said, expectations around this. So this is just a graphical representation of this, where we need to be clear ourselves what it is we intend on doing. And it was mentioned that with awareness, it's to say we are making people aware. But like Marga has said, I think answering a question here today, though it was talking about science diplomats and researchers engaging politicians and sort of finding one another, I have noted an evolution in the years that I've been doing this, where it was predominantly demystifying science around infrastructure that we already had in the country. Then it went to a point where you are now talking of the promise of this new SKA. Of course, you are talking Meerkat at the time, before it was actually set up. And then we are at a stage now where it is here. Money has been put into it. And we are still demystifying the science and talking about what it offers in terms of research advancement and these examples of these benefits and the impact. But repeatedly, you are also getting into spaces where people are asking about the value as it relates to the actual contribution, the actual investment. And of course, we know we are in science engagement. That is what we will do. But perhaps we need to enrich our messaging and be able to be responsive to some of these questions. In this one, I just list the elements of the impact that Meerkat has, but I leave it to colleagues that will present later than me to go into details around these elements. But I put it here so that I could talk to the one that's highlighted at the bottom. Also with a question mark to say, out of all the impact that we talk of, and the fact that it's in a particular province around a certain town in our country, while it is seen as a national project, to what extent are we able to translate that and be seen as we travel around the country in our science engagement, in this raising of awareness, that we are responsive to these questions. And the commercialization and technology transfer then is having this question at the back of my mind of, is that a place where much of this value could then be able to be relayed and or translated as an opportunity a bit more. It is said a picture is worth 1,000 words, so we've already got 1,000. I say we've got an extra 1,000 on this one in terms of the context and the symbolism. This is a picture of me at a school. You will see right on the wall, it says, do your best. And I believe as a community of practice, we're indeed doing our best in what we understand our work to be. But surely we need to look at, does it end here? Is this indeed the best that we can and should be doing? I happen to have a learner here who volunteered to come and answer a question on the board, and I'm raising them up so they could reach that particular point. So the symbolism here in my mind is, yes, we talk of raising this awareness. Yes, we talk of improving scientific literacy, which is important. And we happen to be in a classroom or a school setting here where the system itself primes the learner and the educator to be receptive of science because it's part of the curriculum. It's expected you would talk of these investments, you would talk of these inventions and other things. But the vast majority of the people in South Africa, you'll find that they will not necessarily be readily appreciative of just the science element, but you need to be responsive to them. I mean, the title is public awareness. And so in reaching those other people, you then grapple with the dynamics outside these very specific settings. I won't dwell too much on this. This is just a slide to show the money involved from the South African perspective. So right at the top, I talk of the gross domestic product of the country, which is pegged at that amount. And then you have research and development, which is pegged at that amount, but that is beyond what our Department of Science and Innovation itself puts toward this research. But then you see the percentage in terms of the expenditure on research and development, quite a bit shy of 1% there. Then we talk of the Department of Science and Innovation and its budget. We talk of the National Research Foundation, which is the agency where Sarau is placed under. And you look at the budget of the NRF, which is very close to the amount that has been invested toward Meerkat. This shows the seriousness, of course, of the government in wanting to be part of this. The understanding, even from the diplomatic element and the government element, this agreement that let's indeed do this. But once all of this is done, how do you then go out to the public and make them understand and be able to, while raising the scientific literacy, be able to, in a way, have everybody feeling it is justified. And particularly now, of course, in the past few years, with so many other challenges, you've always got this really big magnifying glass on resources in terms of you have directed them in this way. What is it then that can be seen to be derived sort of at the back end, even on an ongoing basis? And I come back to that element of the positionality. So because I am part of the community of practice, and whenever we are here, I would then say we are part of the converted. But I wanted to remove myself from that, and hence this program at the University of London, and decided to go the route of the program, which is International Business and Development, but still linking it with this element of the Meerkat and the broader SKE project, so that I myself would be advised on how to enhance that element of this value. Because we also have this element of the interchangeability. You'll find us talking about benefits, you'll find us talking about impact, you'll find us talking about value. But when you talk value, it is able to then be isolated and talked about where the actual money and the investment and the perceived return on investment and all of this. I put here very specific examples where I say there will surely be a need to establish and understand and perhaps have a framework of it being different from commercial ventures, of course, but beyond the science, how we are able to start seeing the developments from this particular one, which is Meerkat in the South African context. I'll give you a very specific example. You talk of Wi-Fi. Yesterday at the, was it yesterday before yesterday, pardon me, at the welcoming address, we were told about inventions that came from astronomy, like Wi-Fi, for example, and radar that came from astronomers. In other countries and other continents, when you mention these things, people quickly understand it because they use it. It's accessible. But if you'll talk about this in other contexts, as in South Africa, it is a very small percentage of people that have ready access to internet, let alone the Wi-Fi. And so you start perhaps seeming anecdotal, or you start showing this science and this research as this purview of this aloof group of people and all of these things. And so we need to be able to understand for ourselves how we incorporate this as we plan to go and do public awareness of the research infrastructures. But more importantly, when we get these questions, because sometimes they do come up and it is easy to default to the science-centered type of engagement. But I think it's important that we are able to, in this context, derive for ourselves what all these other values are so that we make this more meaningful as engagements move forward. So this is just the envisaged outcomes of this study that I'm currently busy with, which talks to the element of language, the language in terms of all these various publics, understanding the different contexts. Of course, we can even talk about indigenous languages in the context of South Africa. We have 11 different official languages. And as part of our science engagement and science engagement strategy, we are required to also respond to those, and we're still grappling with those in the first place. But in the end, be able to provide some, even if it's few, specific conclusions for South Africa that would be usable, and perhaps to also reaffirm that indeed it's not a one-size-fits-all for all the partner countries involved, and to also that ethos of science for society. And that will only find expression if you are able to communicate to the communities, to the publics in a way that they can identify with. And it's not using examples from countries that happen to have a long-standing heritage of science, such that they also have these direct benefits and these investments, and they are so normal as part of their lives that it's something that nobody even thinks twice about. And I mentioned here the SDGs, where these are the most relevant ones, I would say, in this instance. And it would be interesting to what extent then, as I mentioned, even with the commercialization and technology transfer and various other developments that would come from the project, those that would respond to those in ways that are practical solutions. So that in the South African context, it can be said, South Africa invested this much for the South African population, as it talks perhaps to Meerkat specifically. And there could be then examples that say, and then this is what came from astronomy broadly, but South Africa specifically was able to find this coming out of what is happening there locally. And just to touch on some of the challenges and lessons learned, adapting to the pandemic, lockdowns were definitely an element that affected us. And going back to that element of the educational system having various different challenges, you may find that in other countries, there is some level of homogeneity in terms of what is taught and the platforms and the spaces in which education takes place. But in South Africa, you have a very, very, very wide range of issues in terms of going back to that one of the Wi-Fi as an example in this instance, where even connectivity is something that was almost impossible to do as other people went the hybrid route or the virtual route. And so there were constraints there, but there were lessons learned. And indeed, to end it off, a lot was learned in terms of the need to bring it all together so that we are able to understand the context. And I'm hoping that with the study, I will be able to incorporate it back into the science engagement that I do, but be able to open up these opportunities for further study as well. Thank you, and I'll be happy to take questions at the end as directed by Matthew. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Simpiwe. And I think the study you're doing actually builds nicely on what Margot was talking about, about focusing some of our communications efforts on impact and on contributions to the SDGs. Actually, Simpiwe is a great example, I think, of science diplomacy in a way. I forgot to mention that he's a recipient of the Chevening scholarships that are provided by the Foreign and Commonwealth Ministry in the UK. So Simpiwe is with us in the UK for, is it a year, Simpiwe, to study? Yeah. So that's a great opportunity. Okay. Let's move on to our next talk. Then we have Bonita online to take us through economic and socio-economic development through co-hosting of astronomy research infrastructures. And she will talk about another radio telescope facility that our South African colleagues are hosting. Bonita, over to you.
Macho, can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
If you could just let me know when there is 2 minutes or so remaining so that I can have an idea of how much time there is.
Sure.
Right. Thank you very much. All right. So I'm Bonita, and I'm from the South African Radio Astronomy as well. And it's good to see some of the South African colleagues over there, Simpiwe. It's nice to see you, to be able to join in person. I'm joining from our Cape Town, well, not our Cape Town offices, but I'm based in Cape Town, and that's also why I'm dressed so warmly today. Okay, so today's talk, I'm going to be focusing on a particular impact study. Some people focused more on, when we talk about impact, we're talking about large infrastructures such as the Meerkat and Esdgs telescope. The idea for this particular impact study goes back to more of what I've termed in this particular publication as what is the impact of smaller telescopes, instruments, or radio astronomy experiments. So I do get a lot of questions from individuals asking, why did you undertake this particular impact study? And the main reason behind that is just to understand what is the significance with hosting these types of smaller infrastructures. And that's what my talk is going to focus on today. So just to give broader context, in the past 3 decades, we've seen significant investment towards large-scale astronomy infrastructure in the Southern African region. And in this slide, I've just hosted some examples. In the case of Namibia, you have the High Energy Stereoscopic System, or HES, in Namibia. In the Southern African region, you also have the Southern African Large Telescope, which is a 10 or 11 meter optical telescope, which is in the Northern Cape province of South Africa, as well as the Meerkat and Esdgs telescope, the Esdgs telescope under construction currently in the Northern Cape. So apart from these large infrastructures, there has been growing international interest into what we term as co-hosting of smaller astronomy telescopes, instruments or radio astronomy experiments, and these are on existing infrastructure sites. And why on existing infrastructure sites? It's seen as a cost-effective option for many countries, because the fundamental infrastructure is mostly in place. So your roads, power, optical fiber, computational infrastructure will be in place, as well as the local human resources needed for maintenance and operations of your infrastructure. Just to give, again, a broader context to this study, if you look at the site of the South African Astronomical Observatory, this is the observatory that manages all the optical facilities in South Africa. This is the observing plateau, and it is close to a town called Sutherland in the Northern Cape province of South Africa. And the telescopes that are labeled in this image are mostly South African telescopes. The SALT instrument, as I mentioned before, is a 10 meter optical telescope. That's the instrument right at the back of this image. And South Africa has a large stake within that particular telescope. So it's considered South African, but it is an international type of telescope. In the foreground, which is what I want to focus more on, you'll see a number of smaller instruments and telescopes. And these are mostly international co-hosted, or what we term as guest instruments, that is hosted on the site. And the different guest instruments are shown at the bottom of this slide. And more recently, the asteroid or Atlas instrument, which is an asteroid early warning detection telescope has been added to this particular edition of telescopes, and it is funded by NASA and currently built by the University of Hawaii. And most of these telescopes are robotic, so they form a network of telescopes globally. So there is quite a bit of interest in being able to put more of these telescopes on either the optical or radio astronomy sites. This is the observing site for the South African Radio Astronomy Observatory. The impact study that I've undertaken has focused on the instrument in the middle of this image, which is the Hydrogen Epoch of Reionization Array, or HERA. And just to give some context of other instruments that are currently on the MeerKAT and Esdgs site, on the left, we have what is considered a precursor to HERA, or the first generation of HERA. It's called the paper instrument. I won't use the scientific name. And on the right, there is a new instrument that will be, I think, functioning towards the middle of this year or the end of this year. It's a collaboration between the University of Cambridge and Stellenbosch University, which is a local South African university. So there is a number of these types of instruments that are being built on these sites that host larger infrastructure. So what are the benefits for developing countries in co-hosting astronomy research infrastructure? Of course, it is a way to attract direct foreign investment into research infrastructure. But in the case of South Africa, it's not just used as a way to attract investment, it's used as a way to build a technically skilled labor force as well. And this is the labor force that contributes to maintenance and operations of the instrument. So these instruments do have economic and socioeconomic impact on the communities closest to the infrastructure. And this is through skills development and the employment that it can create through construction, maintenance, and operations of the infrastructure. Again, what has been very different from the South African context is that we have spent quite a significant amount of funds in developing scientific research capacity. And this is one thing that developing countries also need to focus on is, can they develop their science research capacity and not just host these types of instruments, which does require governments to invest additional funds into, you can look at funding your master's, PhD, postdoctoral research fellows. And this is also one thing that we could look at and how to develop countries further. So this particular impact study has focused on 3 areas. Area 1 being more of an economic benefits assessment. And under this area, we looked at the total investment into the instrument, trying to break down the expenditure into various categories, whether it's the actual infrastructure, equipment, operational costs, as well as human capital costs, as well as what are the benefits to the region where the infrastructure is built. The second area focused more on South Africa's investment towards human capacity development in science and engineering. So how much did South Africa invest in masters, PhD, and postdoctoral research fellows? Which universities benefited from this particular infrastructure? What were the research areas and papers that were published around the particular instrument? We also did a comparison study on how the human capacity development compares to international universities or institutions. And then the third area of the study looked at a socio-economic impact study on the area or region, which is the Northern Cape region, and how did that benefit those individuals that are based locally on the site, as well as trying to understand what the background of these individuals were. I know quite often we look at these individuals and we just look at numbers being employed, but do we understand what their personal circumstances are? And has the building of this particular infrastructure benefited these individuals in any way? So I'll try to highlight just some of the points from the first part of the study, which is your economic benefits and your socio-economic impact within the region that hosts the particular instrument. Just very quickly, this is some background to what the instrument is. So HERA consists of these I would say 350 dishes. It's a very fundamental design in terms of how it's built. So it's not very complicated in terms of its infrastructure design. It is built in phases, with the construction starting in 2015, and it was completed in 2021. And what is this instrument trying to do? It will use the unique properties of the 21 centimeter transition line from neutral hydrogen to probe the cosmic dawn. So that is the epoch looking at the first birth of stars, galaxies, black holes, to when those types of objects have fully re-ionized the primordial intergalactic medium. I know that's a mouthful. This is the international collaboration, or institutions forming part of the international collaboration. I should just mention here that this particular collaboration is led by the US. More specifically, it's led by the University of California, Berkeley. And we have some South African institutions that are part of the research that is conducted with this particular instrument. What is South Africa's role in the HERA collaboration? I think some people did mention that SAREO is a national facility in South Africa. It's responsible for managing all radio astronomy initiatives in South Africa. It is therefore a key partner in the construction of this instrument on the Meerkat or SKA site, and also providing the human resources needed for the maintenance and operations of the instrument. So apart from managing the actual construction of the instrument, we also have some universities that are part of the research forming part of the HERA collaboration. And SAREO also funds a number of students and postdoctoral research fellows to undertake research that is relevant to HERA. Okay, so I'm just going to show one slide on the type of results that you can get from these type of impact studies. And the way that we were able to extract this information is just through SAREO's project management of this particular project. So one of the things that we could extract, for example, was the direct financial investment into this particular instrument. And this was the funding that reflects on SAREO's books. And I should say quite carefully over here that this does not include in-kind contributions from various partners. This is merely just direct financial investment. So it's not all the funding forming part of this particular instrument. And I think what we can take away from this particular slide, even though the instrument is mostly funded through the different institutions in the US, South Africa has contributed almost as much as the US, and this is mostly towards human resources, as well as what we consider human capital development, so funding of your master's, your PhD, and postdoctoral fellowships. And I think this is an important point for developing countries, is that just because you're hosting this particular instrument, you also need to consider what contribution you as the hosting country would need to give towards this particular type of collaborations. Okay, how did this investment benefit the region closest to the infrastructure? And just to show where this region is, this is the 9 provinces in South Africa. And all the observing facilities are located in the Northern Cape province. This is the radio astronomy observatories as well as the optical observatories. So when we talk about what region has benefited from this particular study, we are referring to usually to the Northern Cape province. And at a political level, we would like to show that this region has benefited more than other regions. And that was what we were hoping for through this particular study. I should also point out that the Northern Cape, it's the largest province in South Africa, but it's the most underdeveloped, or one of the most underdeveloped and also sparsely populated populations in South Africa. So what were the findings from this particular study for this region? I'm happy to say that we have found that the hosting province has benefited the most out of all provinces in South Africa, which is a very good result that we can showcase at a political level. We were able to quantify that as an amount, And this is one takeaway that I was also hoping to communicate through this talk, is that if we can quantify investment, that speaks very well at a political level as well. So we were able to say that over 50 million South African rands was spent towards goods and services, and this was in that particular province or region. We were able to also say that out of all the sectors that have benefited, the construction sector was the sector that benefited the most from this particular expenses. And this is what built businesses within that particular province, as well as the building of skills within those construction projects. So how did the investment impact the town closest to the actual hosting instrument? And this is also one of the questions that I had before undertaking this study, is to look at what is the actual financial investment into the town closest to the actual instrument, which is called Carnarvon. And for this particular study, we looked at financial investment as well as local employment that was created for the construction operations and maintenance of the instrument. So out of the study, again, we were able to say that the town closest to the instrument has benefited most out of this investment. And we were able to quantify it again, that 95% of the expenditure was made in this town. And the reason why we could say that is because, again, it goes to the more simplistic or fundamental design of this particular instrument. So we could use local suppliers in trying to build this particular instrument. Another result, we could look at how many people were employed throughout the construction period. And these were individuals that were based or located in the town closest to the instrument. So this instrument created employment opportunities for 24 local individuals. And again, these were individuals that were born and raised in Carnarvon, which is the town closest to the instrument. So it did have benefits to the people closest to the particular instrument. On the other hand, if we look at how many individuals were employed at the time of conducting this survey, the number of employees reduced to less than half. And this is just because post-construction of the instrument, not that many individuals were needed for construction anymore, or for the maintenance and operations of the instrument. And this speaks to sustainability of the employment of these individuals. So I'm just going to focus on the last two slides, which is more, I think, of a good news story as well.
2 minutes, Bonita.
Yes, thank you, Macia. So one of the questions that we asked them, the employees, is through their work with HERA, we found that most of the employees did undertake a professional course, which is good news. It does give them a wider skills base. And this just shows some of the skills or courses that they have undertaken while working with HERA. We also asked these employees, if you were given a chance to choose what you would want to, or course you would want to study, what would you want to study? And these individuals were very ambitious with what courses they would want to study. So there's a number of engineering courses that they focused on: radio frequency engineering, optical engineering. And we need to consider that these are individuals that have, in most cases, not completed even their final year of schooling. But it's good to see that they are being ambitious in terms of what they would like to study. But I think it's a very ambitious answer that we got from many of these individuals. The career aspirations of many of these individuals were focused on job security. And I think that is something that we commonly see in South Africa, is having job stability. And as I've mentioned before, at the time of conducting the survey, most of these individuals were unemployed. Another interesting question that we asked them, in your own understanding, what do you think is the significance of this particular instrument or project? And these were just some keywords that we got from these individuals. And these keywords indicate that even though these individuals do not have any science education, they don't have any astronomy background, that while working on this particular project on the site, they did gain some understanding or fundamental understanding of astronomy and radio astronomy, which is a good sign. And this then can translate into things that they would communicate to individuals in the community. So we see this as a positive outcome. However, many of these individuals did indicate when these types of projects are being built on a site, they would like to have more background information from individuals who are part of these particular projects. So overall, we did have a lot of good results coming out of this particular impact study, and I'm happy to take any questions about this study. I know it's a lot to get through in such a short time, but I can share the report on the Slack channel if that's also useful for people. Thank you, Mattia.
Great, thank you, Bonita. That was really interesting and really concrete. So it's great to see the work you've done to assess the impact locally. If you can share your slides here on the Slack channel when you can, that will be great. And if we have any questions, I'd direct them to the Slack channel as well. Right, with our last talk before the coffee break, we have Sarah Tridgell, who is standing in for Isabel from Diamond Light Source to talk about the socioeconomic impact study that Diamond did. Sarah, over to you.
Okay, so you can hear me okay and see my slides?
Yeah, we can see your slides and we can hear you clearly.
Lovely.
Over to you.
Thank you. So yes, I stepped in for Isabel this morning. So do bear with me. I'm not as familiar with the topic as Isabel is. She lived and breathed it during the whole report. But I will be able to tell you what we did and what we found. And I'm sure we can get any questions answered if you get in touch with Isabel later on if you want to. Just to give you a little bit of background, we started thinking about this in 2016, tended for a contractor, there was an advisory board, and then we had a third party, Technopolis, who undertook the review between 2018 and 2019. So our objectives were to measure and demonstrate Diamond's scientific, technological, societal and economic benefits. So obviously this is something we do talk about a lot and it's highly important, but it's not always tangible. It's not easy to sort of demonstrate what that is without doing this kind of comprehensive report. So we thought this was really important. So our methodology needed to be bespoke, but we did base it on the logic model, which is a recognized evaluation method. And that basically links resources to activities and to goals. So we began with inputs, which are the critical resources required to be successful for Diamond. Activities are the actions of Diamond staff, collaborations and users. Then there's output, which is the direct measurable results of those activities, so tangible and intangible. And the outcomes, which are the benefits resulting from the delivered activities. And then finally, impact, which was deduced value of the outputs and outcomes, and wherever possible, that was monetized in this case. Whilst looking at those parts of the methodology, we categorized them into scientific, technological, societal, and economic. And within that, we drew out key indicators and then put the source of evidence next to each key indicator. So we gathered quantitative data via an online questionnaire survey and got 350 plus responses. We also gathered qualitative data and carried out in-depth interviews to capture views and perspectives from different groups. And we produced case studies, and there was also desk-based research. So just to report on the top-level outcomes of the study. So as you can see, it estimated a cumulative monetised impact of at least 1.8 billion from Diamond, the UK synchrotron. So that's a monetised value of the outputs and outcomes of Diamond. And as we say, this reflects very favourably with the 1.2 billion investment made to the facility to date. When I say to date, that would be up to the reporting period in 2019. And so that investment is basically capital investment and operational cost from the creation of the organisation back in 2002 to when this exercise was carried out. And we figured out that actually the cost to the UK taxpayer is less than a cup of coffee. It's around about £2.45 a year. And we worked that out by dividing the cost supported by the UK government by the number of taxpayers. This graph just gives you a breakdown of the impact areas that were mapped. You can sort of have a look at it whilst it's up there and on the screen, and obviously it is within the report, which is available. You can see that the two largest segments are basically scientific outputs. That's the benefit to users and the value of our publications. I just also want to touch on the software segment, the green one at the top, because within the report, it was identified that interviewees regularly highlighted that the analysis and interpretation of the data is one of the more challenging parts of experimental work. And so the software tools, training and expertise provided by Diamond are a very important part of the facility's offering. So we found it very important and quite useful actually to evidence that and capture that in this report. So just to run through some of the additional findings that, to highlight the significant impact to date. So obviously there's our research output. This is the obvious one. It's the scientific articles that we produce from data that was collected at Diamond. Point of the report, that was 9,600 articles, valued at 677 million. To date, we are approaching 12,000 articles, not quite there yet, but very close. We produce patents, so collectively valued at 10.2 billion. In this study, we did develop 28 case studies specifically to help demonstrate the socio and economic impact. You can see what they touched on on that slide there. And again, if you do download the report, you can have a look at each of those case studies. As I pointed out in the left side, software and applications, an estimated 51.3 million. We also monetized the training that we've provided since we began. And to do this, we compared to the commercial value of similar training. But obviously, this is one of the many examples where it's not just about the cost. There would have been a wider impact on those attending that training. So this is definitely an underestimate. And then the wider societal benefits with having 80,000 visitors since we began. That would be through one-off visits, but also our outreach and education programme. And it's not mentioned here because obviously this is just a few highlights. And this one, again, is hard to monetize, but Diamond has played a major role in the scientific response to the COVID-19 pandemic. So that is referenced in the report itself. So to summarize, the initial 1.2 investment had the goal to deliver the science. We wanted to just make the point that having mapped initial economic benefit is a powerful proof point, and it was mentioned in an earlier talk, it is a good sort of political tool, if you like, when we are trying to reach out to potential funders, future funders, and sort of demonstrate the impact that we're having. And impact actually is really close to the work of communications. So I'm in the communications team, Isabel is the head of the communications team. So impact is really integrated into what we do and how we monitor the organisation. So again, really worthwhile doing a report like this. And looking beyond the science, as part of the communications activities, we have public engagement and education, and they, again, are hard to monetize, but nevertheless do have impact on young people and taxpayers in a positive way. So looking at what's next. So this is just the beginning as far as we're concerned. We're really pleased with how the report has been received so far. We've had, I think, over 1,500 downloads now. And so the next stage is an evaluation framework to further quantify impact. So this would be developed to be used as the basis for tracking performance in the future and to ensure that there is a more wide-ranging and complete record of achievements to allow Diamond to more clearly understand and demonstrate the extent to which it's supporting beneficial outcomes. And we want to explore new methodologies for the qualitative data, so more case studies. These are a great way to showcase what Diamond does and the impact that it has on science and society. Now, to do this work, we will be appointing an impact manager. So they will be focusing on and dedicating adequate time to evidencing and demonstrating the impact of Diamond. And that will be really important for us in the future as we're currently developing the full business case for Diamond 2, which is a machine upgrade to the whole facility, the machine, beam lines. So it's really important to demonstrate the impact, as this is a really big project and a big undertaking. So just to finish off, I wanted to say that there are more details, obviously, in the report. You can also find case studies. It is available to download. I think the best way to get to it is through the homepage of our website. You can see the screenshot there, that big blue banner at the top. That links you through to where the report is linked to, so you can download it from there. And yeah, we just think, it's a really good baseline for all research infrastructure in terms of the methodology and, what we were looking at. So as I say, if you do want to know more, that was definitely a whistle-stop tour of our report. I've put Isabel's email address up there on the screen. And as I say, she really is the expert in this, and she would definitely be happy to share with you. As I say, she's very keen for this to be a kind of best practice baseline report, that others can learn from and work from. So yes, that's it for me. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much. Again, I think that was extremely valuable to us as communications teams to see the work that you've done, and the focus on measuring impact and the development of specific case studies. It's something SKO is working on as well. And I'll just note the appointment of an impact manager as something really interesting. You do need to have dedicated resources to measure impact, because it is extremely time consuming but extremely valuable. So thank you to our speakers from this first half of our societal impact session. We will now take a break for 10 minutes. I will ask you to be back in here at 11:10. And during the break, we'll set up our next 4 speakers. Thank you. So thank you for joining us for the second half of this session on the societal impact of research infrastructures. We have 4 speakers with us in this next section. Actually, more than 4 speakers. We have 4 talks, and I think we have 6 speakers. So we'll hear from Sarek, we'll hear from Eso, and we'll hear from Embol. In the interest of time, I will not introduce every speaker and read their bio. You have them on air and on the app. So let's just dig right in with our first presenters. We have Salma and Anne-Charlotte. So I'll hand over to you.
Thank you. Okay, I will just share my screen. Okay, you can see
great.
my slide, right?
Yep, you're good to go.
Hi, everyone. I'm Salma Baghdadi. I'm a communication officer at Sarek ERIC and in charge of the communication at the ERIC Forum. So today, together with the colleague Anne-Charlotte Fauvel from Beatrice ERIC, we'll be highlighting the societal role and impact of ERICs. So I would briefly introduce the ERIC Forum for those who are not familiar with it. So the ERIC Forum was set up in 2017, and it brings together all European research infrastructure consortia. So until today, it counts 24 ERICs. So basically the latest one is MIRI ERIC, and the official announcement of the Commission decision was yesterday evening. So until today, we are 24 ERICs. And the aim is to strengthen the coordination among the community. And there are internal and external goals. Let's say the internal ones are to address critical challenges among the community and share best practices which address various fields. So it can be human resources, budgeting, intellectual property, sustainability, and so on. And my colleague Anne-Charlotte will later on focus more on the impact of ERICs on employment, on European employment. Regarding the external goal is to be one voice of the ERIC community for matters of common interest towards key stakeholders, towards policymakers, and towards different target audiences. Also to foster the visibility of ERICs and their impact in the European research area, but also towards different stakeholders. So the ERIC community covers the 5 clusters of the S3 roadmap clusters, and the goal is basically in this session is to highlight the contribution of ERICs to the sustainable development goals. So we have been through the ERIC Forum implementation project, which started in 2019 and is ending by the end of this year. We had several activities to highlight these let's say this goal. So we have collected from the various ERICs the research findings and success stories that they would like to highlight within their ERICs, contributing to a different SDGs. And through that, from that, there were several online and offline campaigns and activities aiming to increase and highlight the visibility of these success stories. So either through promoting individual ERICs research findings, highlighting the contribution of ERICs in general to COVID-19 through the various services and the research findings that they have access to, also highlighting the contribution to societal challenges and so on. Regarding the offline campaigns, which I would highlight as participating in key events targeting either policymakers, for example, for ICRI, which will be coming up in October, ESO, which was last week, the Science Summit, which was last year, and it will be coming up also this year, and so on. So there were a set of activities, and there was a continuous monitoring of these activities, also using, let's say, different occasions to highlight them. So if we go to the first one, to energy, for example, Excel contributes to this SDG on clean energy and climate action by contributing to reducing CO2 emissions from industry and power generation. So this was highlighted through different occasions. The environment cluster, for example, which groups together EMSO, EPOS, Euroargo, ICOS, and LifeWatch, addresses not only climate change, but also life below water through, for example, addressing the impact of climate change on ocean chemistry, contribution to carbon neutrality through the high quality measurements of greenhouse gases, which is the case of ICOS ERIC in this case, and so on. And so the promotion was also, for example, focused on, let's say, the International Day of Environment. So taking key events at European or international level to highlight the contribution of these clusters to various SDGs. So the health and food cluster contributes, among others, to accelerating cancer research. In this case, for example, the case of VMRI, by pooling valuable human samples and clinical data, also providing imaging technologies to study a set of, let's say, DNA and related metabolisms, and supporting the COVID-19 vaccine development, which is, in this case, the example of Instruct. The fourth cluster, which is physical sciences and engineering, is basically tackling various fields, but it's also, as a consequence, related to various SDGs. So it can also support research on plastic pollution, which is the case of CERIC, by discovering microplastics in small invertebrates in Antarctica. It also contributes to a reduced energy consumption in food production and so on. So all these examples, I will mention the last one, which is social and cultural innovation, and the ERICs in this cluster are basically presenting data and surveys which contribute to tackling various SDGs, so either related to poverty, to education, gender equality, sustainability, climate action, and so on. So some of the main contributions or let's say research studies contribute to assessing social inequalities in health through survey data and so on. So basically all these research findings, or let's say services that are available through the ERICs, have been presented throughout different occasions on online and offline activities, and targeting, let's say, mostly policymakers, but also researchers in academia, in industry, to increase also the awareness of the availability, the services available in the ERICs within the research environment, and through key events, of course. So regarding the first point that I mentioned in an earlier slide, which is related to the impact of ERICs on employment, we'll give the floor to my colleague Anne-Charlotte Fauvel from EATRIS to highlight more this point.
Thank you very much, Salma. So hello, everyone. I'm really happy to present to you today a little bit of thoughts and observations on employment and ERIC. So I'm Anne-Charlotte, I'm Head of European Affairs at EATRIS, and I'm also leading a work package in the ERIC Forum project dedicated to operations, HR, finance, and administration. So I just wanted to start with highlighting that as infrastructures impact on employment in the European research area comes in all shapes and forms. But also first, I think what's important to highlight is the importance of working for an ERIC, because as young organizations, for most of the ERIC Forum members, as you could see, the latest ERIC was approved yesterday. So it's important for us as a community to also improve and work on attractiveness as employers. So of course, ERICs can provide access to international work environment, but they also offer opportunity to staff and collaborators to be exposed to different disciplines and different sectors, because the emphasis of ERICs is very much about mixing science, infrastructure, and business, and also working with a various range of infrastructure users, academia, industry, of course, but also close collaboration with governments and policymakers, as Salma mentioned, and the general public. I said earlier that employment comes in all shapes and forms because, well, through our work package and a project, we see that there's a lot of administrative and legal challenges and headaches sometimes that comes with operating an infrastructure, which is an ERIC, but it also takes a village to actually go through the entire life cycle and preparatory and operational phases of running the organization. So of course there is direct employment, but most of our ERICs also deal with secondment situations, because only a few of our ERICs are actually single-sided. Most of them are distributed, which means they're pooling existing research facilities and resources available across Europe, which in a way also provides ERIC with a great opportunity to diversify the way staff and collaborators get involved and contribute to the ERIC's developments through secondment, for example, and then we see staff being employed in other research institutions than where their ERIC is seated officially, or the country where the ERIC is seated. In-kind contributions are also a very routine, I would say, way of operating for ERICs. It could be free of charge or against payment. For some of them, it could be equipment, but for others, it's just the staff from other research institutions being involved in contributing to the ERICS, for example. So the spans of how ERICS impacts employment is actually quite diverse and quite broad. And that impacts all stages of the life cycles, not only operations, given the effort required in the preparatory phase, especially in-kind contributions in that phase before the ERIC gets its legal status. But the impact actually goes beyond the staff running the operations. As I mentioned, most of the ERICs are distributed, which means an ERIC may have staff in where it has a seat, but also has staff in the nodes, so multiple countries that are members of the infrastructure, and also in the facilities themselves. But furthermore, the impact also, we should look at the users benefiting from the ERIC services, projects, awards, because ERICs are really there to facilitate research and also bring additional opportunities to their members. One obvious example could also be training, and beyond employment, the impact that ERICs already have on employability of the people they train in multiple areas, in multiple disciplines, given the ERICs width of disciplines, but also suppliers, because in a few cases where ERICs actually building a large facilities, they have to rely on industry suppliers to build such facilities. And I would like to just highlight one of our member of the ERIC Forum, which is the European Spallation Source. So for those who don't know ESS, so ESS is currently in construction phase until 2025. And once this phase is completed, it will be an international research facility based on the world's most powerful neutron source. And it's currently under construction in Sweden. And they just released not too long ago their first societal impact report from the early phase of the construction until 2018. And you see in these two graphs on the left side, really the range and the high number of industry suppliers in the member countries that are actually involved in developing technologies or contributing to the facility in some way or another. And on the right side, another figure that provides also a little bit more insight on the overall economic benefits for those industry suppliers to work with ESS. And of course, those include starting new business units, establishing new teams, entering new markets, and therefore also creating employment opportunities because of the ERIC that they are serving and supporting. But I also wanted to share a few observations that I think were important in the way that ERICs, which are relatively young organization, and how they're developing to really make sure that they are attractive and truly European employers. One of the trend, I must say, that we have observed, especially with the pandemic, is that some of the ERICs are really also adjusting the way they're working and the way they address or tackle employment. And we see, because some of them are pooling existing resources and facilitating research, not conducting research necessarily in their hub or in their headquarters, they have the flexibility to also offer remote working policies. For example, EATRIS set up payroll in 6 countries within 2 years. So now we have staff across 7 countries. And this is a particularly interesting development for ERICs that are looking to attract highly qualified candidates, but those candidates may not be able or may be interested in moving to where the ERIC is located. Then another development, we see that a few ERICs
2 minutes, please, Anshana.
Okay, I'm nearly finished, thank you. And then the Receiver Pension Fund, which is a pension fund co-developed and funded by the European Commission that targets research organizations, that provides an interesting model to support mobility of researchers across Europe and across organizations. So by being member of this pension fund, also ERICs are supporting their research staff and also research management staff, future professional and geographical mobility. And then one last point I would like to highlight is ERIC Forum members' efforts towards gender equality with a working group that's been active in a committee of practice for like a year now. where the ERIC members are exchanging resources and regularly sharing best practice and experience. And ERIC Forum also developed a gender equality plan template. So all the ERICs are also striving to become more gender balanced and more gender equal employers, which is a very important aspect in being an attractive employer in the future. And that's it for me. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you both. And from the contribution of ERICs to the SDGs, we move to the contribution of an intergovernmental organization to the SDGs. So Annaline, over to you.
Yes, thank you very much. Let me just share my screen. How's that? Can you all see it?
Yep, that's great.
Okay, lovely. Right. Hi, everyone. My name is Annaline. I'm the head of communications at the European Southern Observatory. And I'm really pleased to have the opportunity today to talk to you about astronomy and society. Why does it matter? Although I have the feeling in the audience we've got today, not many people are asking themselves this question. We have lots of people from the astronomy community here. You're going to see a bit of an ESO double act now, I'm afraid, because I'm going to be talking more along the lines of process and the communications angle. And then my colleagues Maria and Andrea, who are going to follow, are going to go more in depth into content of societal benefits and what ESO contributes towards the SDGs. To start off, not sure how relevant this is here, but I'm going to do it anyway. What is ESO? We're an intergovernmental organization dedicated to astronomy, owned by 16 member states, European member states, plus a strategic partner in Australia, and importantly, a host and partner country in Chile, where our telescopes are based. We're celebrating 60 years this year, so towards October, you're going to see some anniversary fun. Headquarters of the organization are in Germany, Munich, where I'm based. But then, as I said, the more important side is really Chile, where all our telescopes are operated in the Atacama Desert, very one of the darkest and most driest places on Earth, and a wonderful view to the Milky Way. ESO's missions, we build and operate world-class ground-based astronomical facilities. So that's what really distinguishes us from organizations like ESA. We do astronomy from the ground. We foster collaboration in astronomy. That's the second mission. And in terms of size, we're about 700 people from 30 countries, kind of half of them in Chile, half of them in Germany. So that much for introductions. Let me get to the topic, societal benefits. First of all, again, here, I'm not sure we need this question, but why study societal benefits of research infrastructures? And there, I think, are many good reasons. So the first and foremost really is we have a responsibility to society. Being tax funded, we have a responsibility to show what we do with that public money and that we spend it wisely and in a way that it generates benefits for society. It also helps us making the case for astronomy and fundamental research to have these arguments at hand if we can show how we can contribute to society. This in turn helps then securing support by member states, funders, and the public. And then me being a communications professional, it's also about uncovering really exciting stories from the organization that can be told to the outside world and can get it engaged with what we do. Plus, it does a great deal for the motivation of staff to show that what they do matters and really adds something to society. And then there's an element of, and that's you've seen this morning, everybody's doing it. So there has been a trend in the research infrastructure community since 10 years or so that funders really expect us to look at our societal benefits. So lots of good reasons. And with those in mind, I'm going to tell you a little bit about the societal impact study, the first systematic one that ESO has conducted in 2020. And it had two distinct goals, distinct but interlinked, I'd say. It was about providing a factual and compelling narrative of ESO's societal benefits across a range of domains, and then raising awareness of these benefits amongst all ESO stakeholders. And I'm going to touch on both of these elements today. In terms of methodology, I'll be brief, but just for you to know, we conducted actually two parallel studies. One focused internationally on the impacts ESO has on society in general, with a specific focus on our member states. And then a parallel one that looked specifically at our host site and state, Chile, where, as you heard this morning from the South African colleague, actually the sites where the infrastructure is based physically derives quite some different benefits from an infrastructure than member states in general. Our study was a lot shorter than what we heard this morning about other studies. 3 to 4 months we had available, which when I talk about lessons learned, you will see is ambitious, and we would have liked more time. We were supported by consultants as well. We worked with the European EFIS, European Forum for Systems Innovation. I never get it right, EFIS. It's they're a big name in the research infrastructure impact evaluation. Together with them, there were 3 kind of main pillars that we looked into. One, the first thing we did was quite a substantial documentary analysis, where we really read into historical documents about ESO's mission, why were we founded, and how have we documented over the years, as I said, it's 60 this year, how we're adding value to society. Then we conducted more than 50 interviews with stakeholders from all sorts of realms from society, starting with scientists and collaborators, our council delegates, but also members of the public, teachers, students who've visited our visitor centers, and so on. So there was quite a diverse range, industry contacts, alumni, and so on. And from these interviews, we really distilled down how these people have been impacted by ESO in their lives. And then the third element was data analysis. So we collected a lot of internal data, ranging from publications data, user data, contracts we're giving to industry, collaborations, and so on, and derived some numerical indicators from this. This is the framework we worked with. This is EFIS' approach to measuring or evaluating impact and research infrastructures. It's about mapping impact pathways, similar to what we heard this morning from, I believe it was Diamond, where we looked at resources and activities to what outputs do these lead short-term and longer-term outcomes. And then the magic is really at the end there in the impacts, where you're getting in quite abstract territory, because you're trying to evaluate something as abstract as increased trust in science or increased literacy, scientific literacy of society. So this is what we were digging into and trying to trace. From that study, we found that ESO's impact clusters around 5 areas. The first one being science and engineering, which is not really a surprise for a science research infrastructure. The second being in the area of economy and innovation. So how do we contribute to the economy of our member states, but also how does our innovation help industry compete or get into areas that they wouldn't usually have gotten into, for example. Talent development, what kind of skills do we create in people that help advance society? Education and outreach, for most of you in this room, probably a no-brainer. And then international collaboration and policy. And as I said, I'm not going to go into content here. Time is simply not enough, and you will hear a bit more about it later. But I'm going to quickly look at the impact that is created by education and outreach activities, sort of indicatively, to show you what kind of material we got out of this study, and then move on to how we use that for communication purposes. So looking at education and outreach and the impact it has, there are 9 distinct areas identified, ranging from increasing scientific literacy, over promoting STEM careers, to increased public support to astronomy and science, contribution to diversity and social inclusion in science, contribution to arts and culture, professionalization of science communication, this is something this conference is also aimed at, placing Earth in the context of the universe. I said before, some of these impacts are really abstract, but incredibly important. So this is about giving people more context of their planet, where it is, the fragility of their planet, and kind of changing their way of viewing things through this. Very hard to measure and quantify. Public inspiration, fascination, again, not so easy to measure. And then the last one, shaping national identities as astronomy nations. And this is an element that's particularly evident in Chile, where they refer to themselves as the world's astronomy capital. And it shows how the presence of the many observatories, obviously in addition to the marvelous conditions they have to observe the night sky, has really shaped national identity. So in terms of what we got out of the study, more practically, there were indicators of impact, so numerical indicators. How do we show this in numbers? Number of public visitors is one for the education and outreach area. The times ESO is mentioned in the press daily. How many social media followers, visitors to the supernova, our visitor center and planetarium in Garching, close to Munich. Apart from this, we also dug deep into some cases and developed case studies, as others this morning have also mentioned. For example, here looking more at promoting STEM careers, this impact and how we achieve that through a variety of activities that I won't have the time to go into in a lot of detail right now. And then also super valuable, lots and lots of quotes, over 50 interviews, yield lots of quotes of many different people that really tell personal stories. And the beauty of this is they tell the story in the voices of the people that have been impacted by ESO. So these were incredibly useful resources for communication purposes. So here we are, we have all of this material, and the deliverable that the consultants brought us was quite a big report that probably most of you have done a study like this know. Political report, dense report, which is great for ESO Council, who are the main audience for this study. But when you then want to communicate it to other people, it's not the best format. And we felt that a lot of this material was really relevant for lots of audiences, decision makers and funders, obviously, astronomy and engineering community, so the people we work with on a day-to-day basis, industry contacts, the public, ESO staff, as I said, is a great motivator to know what kind of impact your work has. So to reach these people, we developed designated communication campaigns, plural. I'm going to go into the plural a little bit later, with the goals of allowing people to learn about the value of astronomy and basic research, promoting awareness of ESO as an organization and its impact, creating a sense of pride of ESO, not only among our staff, but also hopefully among the stakeholders who fund us and ideally also the public. Build support for ESO and in particular the extremely large telescope that we are currently building in Chile as our next big project. Then showing the accountable use of public money, being transparent with what we're doing with that money, and raising awareness of ESO as an employer and business partner. So quite a lot of stuff I try to achieve with these campaigns. And how they looked like is that essentially we made use of all the communication channels we have available. And the first step there was to digest and get the big consultants report into an executive summary format of brochures that is more visual, heavily infographic based, short messages so that people can digest this information. We created 2 of these brochures, again, because the benefit overall to society and in the member states is somewhat different to what Chile gains from ESO. Plus the brochure aimed at Chile obviously was not only there in English, but also in Spanish. Then we developed dedicated web pages for this content so that people have digital access to it. We ran social media campaigns. I'm going to go into in the next slide. We presented that material. 2 minutes. All right, yes. Thanks. Presented that material at a lot of conferences. Also developed resources, slide decks and infographics for people, for ESO ambassadors basically, to talk on our behalf about this. Video material and staff events. Communication campaigns, 1 international one, 1 Chilean one. You can read here in more detail how many people were reached. But I wanted to mention the kind of material we put on there. So it ranged from the scientific discoveries that ESO enabled over a lot of personal stories by people who have been touched by ESO in a way, impacted by ESO. So people who were fellows at ESO and then went on to have different careers, or industry partner who really benefited from working with us. And we also had an engagement element to it where we asked people to share their stories, right? Stories that we didn't know about yet, where people could share how they have been impacted by the organization. So 1 more minute to share the lessons learned. 3 to 4 months, too short for an in-depth study. It was very ambitious to start with, and I really feel we scratched the surface and there's so much more. and we would like to look into it a lot more, but that's the time we had at the time. The importance of data quality and standardization. It is difficult to draw kind of numerical indicators that make sense from institutional data unless it's really standardized and collected curated in a way. And simple messages are hard to come by. Limitations to working with consultants. Wonderful to work with consultants because they are experts in assessing impact of research infrastructures. More challenging that they don't know the organization at all. And our organizations are complex, and you have to kind of teach them what these are, what it is that makes us special and how it's all interlinked. It takes a lot of time. So you can't just hand this project over to consultants and they're going to deliver. I think that's an important lesson. Then running 2 campaigns, reconciling different audiences, timing, logistics, and political messaging between kind of Europe and Chile is a challenge. Just as an example, messages like Chileans being the highest represented nationality among our staff with 25%, great message for Chile, harder sell in Europe. So how do you reconcile this? And it's an area where we really went for transparency and engaged in dialogue with people. So that was important. Apart from that, many engagement opportunities arose from this campaign. As I said, we're speaking at conferences about it. We got social media engagement with staff and collaborators out of it. And then also we had quite some interest from high-level decision takers and funders who received this material and upon this contacted us and said, oh, that's interesting. Can we talk more about this with you? And we took them on virtual visits to observatories. And finally, we got lots and lots and lots of fantastic stories and content for the future out of this exercise. Some of which my colleagues are going to share now as they show how a lot of this data was then kind of reanalyzed in the light of what we contribute to the Sustainable Development Goals. And I'm going to stop it here, and I'm going to be available for questions at the end of the session.
Great, thank you, Annalyn. It's really good. Thank you for the lessons learned as well, the slides on lessons learned. It's very helpful, and I could see myself nodding at every bullet point on there. Right, we will move on to our next speaker from ESO, and I think Andrea will be presenting this next presentation, if I'm not wrong. I'll just actually mention that Andrea is a PhD candidate in astrophysics, but earlier this year she was also an intern at ESO in the Office of the Director General, and she was investigating how ESO contributes to the SDGs and science diplomacy. Andrea, over to you.
Yes. Thank you very much. Can you all hear me?
Yes, all good.
Okay, well, thank you very much for this opportunity to be giving this talk on behalf of the European Southern Observatory. This is a work that I developed with Dr. Maria Livanova, who's here in the panel, and also with Andy Williams. And part of this internship that I performed at ESO was about investigating how the European Southern Observatory contributes to advancing the Sustainable Development Goals. And so before I proceed further, I would like to take a step back and reflect for a couple of seconds about astronomy. Astronomy, we know, is one of the oldest fundamental sciences, and it has brought humanity's curiosity to explore what's there up in the heavens. It also bestows a legacy of knowledge to future generations. And astronomy as a science has proven to be a key to a rational and science-led society. And therefore, in this regard, ESO plays a key role through its mission of designing, building, and operating the world-leading observatories and fostering cooperation in astronomy. By enabling these discoveries, increasing our knowledge about this cosmos, and of course, raising the scientific awareness in society, as Annalyn was saying. But ESO also develops new technologies that in the end benefit society in unexpected ways. And of course, establishes these international collaborations of scientists, engineers, even people from policy making arena into peaceful purposes. And so, of course, ESO also plays a crucial role in achieving the Sustainable Development Goals. It is directly or indirectly impacting 14 out of the 17 SDGs and many of its targets. And I would like to highlight some of them in 5 main areas that we found: quality of education, closing the gender and the inequality gap, the economy, technology, and innovation, environmental and sustainability, and as a case study, and I think that is one of the core activities of ESO, is the dark night skies, astrotourism, and society. So let me dive in. As Annalyn was saying, it's no surprise for any of the people right now in the audience that as a large infrastructure in education and in science, ESO contributes to the SDG 4, quality of education, by training the leaders not only of astronomy and science, but in all sectors or many sectors of society. In the last 10 years, ESO has trained about 260 students from more than 40 countries in science, engineering. It has also had around 90 interns in science grading, graphic design, astronomy, engineering, administration, and even me in science diplomacy and policy, and has been host of almost 150 postdoctoral fellows from more than 30 countries. ESO has also a compromise with educational training and programs for school students and teachers. And this includes, for example, the ESO Supernova, which is an open source visitor center and planetarium located in Garching in Germany. And the Supernova Center offers continued professional development for teachers in Europe and materials that are widely available for free online. Moving on to closing the gender and inequality gap, equity, diversity, and inclusion are actually values within the organization. And to highlight a couple of activities in this area, I would like to highlight the memorandum that Chile signed with the UN Women, in Chile in 2020, that aims to assess the gap, the gender gap in STEM careers and the recruitment strategies in ESO. ESO is also part of the Genera Network, which is a network that aims to foster collaboration in gender equality policy in physics between research organizations, associations, consortia all around the world that are involved in physics, communities, and projects. ESO is also running, for example, a pilot program of joint internships back in Chile with Laboratoria, which is a nonprofit organization that is focusing on training low-income young women in skills such as programming, web development, and promoting their accessibility to the industry force. And ESO also has dedicated funds to support locally, but also back in Chile, high school and university students to have better access to education and outreach projects and opportunities. In terms of economy, technology, and innovation, we know that one of the ESO's core mission is to enable major scientific discoveries by constructing, of course, and operating these powerful observational facilities. And as such, of course, ESO generates new markets and opportunities, as well as the creation of jobs and industrial collaborations. And I would like to highlight two of them that, as an astronomer as well, it also caught my attention. For example, ESO worked with Toptica, which is a German company, to develop the 20 watts lasers. And those are the lasers that we use for, or the telescopes use for artificial guiding stars. And later, they licensed this technology to Toptica and a communication industry based in Canada. And this was the first transfer of patented technology from ESO to industry that provides, of course, opportunities for industry and technology. And in addition to their application, for example, to astronomy, these high-power lasers also offer uses in fields of space situational awareness, optical satellite communication. So this is a really nice example of how ESO is contributing to SDG 9, industry, innovation, and infrastructure, of course. And also, one of the targets in SDG 8 has to do with, in SDG 9, sorry, has to do with supporting domestic technology development, research and innovation in developing countries. And I would like to highlight that ESO astronomers have helped actually in setting up a professional observatory in Mount Entoto in Ethiopia. And ESO has also transferred knowledge, astronomical knowledge in Ghana to set up a similar program as part of their astronomy research training. Speaking of environment and sustainability, ESO is of course committed on the search of alternative, cleaner, renewable energy sources to power their facilities in Chile and even Germany. In the case of Chile, we know that Chile has in average 320 clear nights per year, and the clear daytime sky also provides a wonderful source for alternative energy, in this case, solar energy. And just recently, like a week ago, we received the news that ESO's Paranal Observatory started receiving energy from the largest solar plant in Chile dedicated to astronomy, the Paranal Armazones photovoltaic plant, which will avoid the emission of 1,700 of CO2 per year for the operation of the ESO's VLT and ELT. And I think this is a testament of ESO's commitment to adopt sustainability officially as an ESO value. And of course, as an organization, it continues to strive to find further measures to reduce the organization's CO2 footprint. And another example is back in Chile, on site, ESO is gradually replacing its fleet of vehicles by electric cars, and it is aiming for having no fossil fuels across all ESO sites in the upcoming years. As a model for peaceful cooperation, we were listening to Margawal earlier today about science diplomacy, and ESO is also a wonderful example for science diplomacy and bringing countries together to work on science. And actually, the foundation of ESO itself rests on this very idea of peaceful partnerships, of doing something together that no single member state could achieve. And also, it fosters collaborations between two continents, South America with Chile and Europe, and this makes it very unique in its own kind of way for this kind of partnerships, of course, impacting SDG 16 and SDG 17. So I'm close to the end, and I would like, in this case, to bring our case study, which is the dark night skies, astrotourism, and society. There is a wealth of evidence of the impact that preserving and protecting our night skies can have, not just on society, but also on nature, on development, on society. Just to name a few, the dark night sky, of course, is a source of education. It can be used as a tool for science outreach on topics ranging not only from astronomy, but from, for example, indigenous heritage to light pollution. It's been studied that less light polluted skies or dark night skies have positive impacts on marine and terrestrial wildlife. Stargazing also promotes health and wellness in society. As I said, astrotourism can be a source of development for economies in the countries. And it can empower women in remote areas through training and astronomy and tourism, like the example of the AstroStays project. So many of the byproducts of this dark sky preservation have either a direct or indirect impact on achieving some of the UN SDGs. And so it doesn't
2 minutes, Andrea, please.
It does not come as a surprise that ESO's advocacy for preserving our dark and quiet skies and all the activities that derive from it impact so many of the SDGs and that you can see right now. From those, I would just like to highlight especially one. ESO participated together even with SKAO, if I'm not wrong, in an international collaboration that submitted a paper to the United Nations Committee on Peaceful Uses of Outer Space, the COPUS, seeking for better protections for the Earth's dark, quiet skies. And it marked the first time that dark and quiet skies has ever been on the table as a formal agenda item by the UN. And so by doing this advocacy, Eso is contributing specifically to SDG 4.7, which is related to acquiring the skills needed to promote sustainable development through the promotion of culture of peace, nonviolence, global citizenship, and appreciation of cultural diversity, which, as Annalyn said, even though we cannot measure it, it's something very important in terms of astronomy and what ESO is doing. SDG 8.9, which has to do with devising and implementing policies to promote sustainable tourism that creates jobs and promotes local culture and products. SDG 11.4, which has to do with strengthening the efforts to protect and safeguard the world's cultural and natural heritage, which in this case is, of course, our dark skies. And even related to climate change, because by connecting to our sky, by our universe, by our origins, I think we are also contributing to raising awareness of the importance of taking action to climate change mitigation. So to finalize, I hope by this point I have successfully made the case that astronomy is a super important driver for development, for achieving the SDGs, and that ESO is playing a crucial role in making this possible. So I hope that at some point we have this SDG 18, a space for all, astronomy for all. And with this, I will leave you. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you very much, Andrea. That was very good. And talking of sustainability, we move from one IGO to another, and we go to EMBL to tell us about their work on their sustainability strategy and communications. So I'll hand over to Tabia.
Thanks.
There you go.
So I hope you can hear us all okay. Yes. Okay, we're the last talk in this slot, but I would like to start and thank the organizing committee for this wonderful experience. I'm here, I think, the only one on site. It has been a wonderful experience so far. We're on day 3, and so it's just kind of a huge thank you to all of you to make this a really amazing experience. For me, being that it's the first PARI ever. Coming to our talk together with Brendan Rouse, we are from EMBL, the European Molecular Biology Laboratory, and we are talking about communicating the multiple roles of research infrastructures in promoting sustainability. And why Brendan, as sustainability officer, and me are doing this together, because we're the so-called ComSpeed, which means that we are like a special link between the communications department and the sustainability department. And I hope the next 10 to 15 minutes, these slides show how much impact we can create with the co-creation, collaboration on promoting sustainability around research infrastructures. This is kind of an overview about EMBL's vision, the new EMBL program. It outlines EMBL's plans for the next 5 years. And it's called the Molecules to Ecosystem, labeled as the new era of molecular biology to understand life in context. I'll list a few things to see how molecular biology and this program foresees how this research can contribute to sustainability. And the idea of Green EMBL was actually born during the development of that program. Our DG, Edith Hurd, initiated workshops to really find out and cover the whole breadth of molecules to ecosystems. And in one of these workshops, the idea of Green EMBL was basically born. And the program helps to address all these relevant topics, ranging from irreversible loss of biodiversity to food security, and addressing all these social, societal, and economical changes we are facing in the upcoming years. And I'm handing over to my colleague, Brendan.
Yeah, thank you, Tabia. I hope you can all hear me okay. So I just want to, before we kind of look into some of the specifics here, just kind of lay a bit of groundwork about how we kind of successfully communicate sustainability. And it might be a surprise to some of you, to some not, but actually the first kind of news articles about climate change appeared 110 years ago, as shown in that little clip there. And I think that really just shows that this has been known to mankind for so long. There's been, 26 of these COP conferences. It's big news stories all the time, and yet we still find that global emissions are continuing to grow, and really behavior change at a big scale isn't happening yet. So I think what we need to understand is when we're talking about sustainability communications is that just giving people facts doesn't necessarily lead to a behavior change. So when we talk to our colleagues and other stakeholders about this, there's just some really important kind of methods that we need to use to make it impactful. So the first one really is that we need to appeal to both the logical reason for sustainability and also people's emotional thing. And Anne-Lynn from ESO gave a great slide there where she talked about all the logical reasons for pursuing this. And we need to understand what they are for our individual organizations and how we communicate those. And we also need to be aware of the kind of emotional need that some people have for protecting the environment or securing our children's futures, for having a more equitable world. And another thing that I think is really important is when we talk to different stakeholders about this, is we try to understand what motivates them to behave the way they behave, and what barriers are in their way that stops them from changing their behaviours into a way that we would like to see. And we can talk a little bit about how we're trying to tackle those at EMBL later. And another thing that's really, really important is that we need to have one-to-one conversations when we're doing this. And when we're having those conversations, it's really important that we as the sustainability professionals, we listen first and foremost. We don't try and preach. We emphasize with the other people, and we adapt our communications to them, to what are their barriers, what are their motivators. Is this a logical thinker? Is the emotional message going to work? So those are just some, I think, really important bit of groundwork there before we move on. Next slide, please, Tabia. So at EMBL, we've developed a sustainability strategy which came into force just at the beginning of this year. And part of what I'm talking about of listening and consulting is when we developed the strategy back in the summer of 2020, we actually did what's called a materiality assessment, in which case we asked a consultant to really have conversations with a range of our internal and external stakeholders and to talk to them about what they perceived as important issues for EMBL. And, they had a big methodology, and through the conversations that they had and this consultation, they came up with what we call a materiality matrix, shown on the slide here, where they have, let's say, scored 10 different environmental topics based on our stakeholders' kind of views on whether that is a material topic based on the size of its impact on EMBL, how much interest do those stakeholders show, and finally, how big of an impact does EMBL have on them? So how big is our carbon footprint? How big is our water footprint, for example? And as they've scored those, what we were hoping to see and what we have seen is that there's a kind of a group of environmental topics in that top right-hand corner that are shaded in the green bubble there. And those are the ones now that we can say, having consulted and listened and done this exercise, are the material topics at EMBL. And those are the things that we've now brought forward and developed our strategy on. So we have published our strategy. If you go to the next slide, please, Tavia. And we've taken those 7 topics that came out as material, and we've divided them into our 3 pillars for our strategy. And going back to the topic of the speech, we could look at these each as 3 of our roles when we're talking about communicating sustainability as a research infrastructure. So first pillar, that we do environmentally responsible research. So this is our operational impact. The second pillar is that we do environmentally relevant research. So really that, our research itself is possibly the biggest positive impact we can have, and making sure that some of that is dedicated to sort of environmental questions, and we spread the learnings and the research outcomes. And then finally, the third pillar is that we use our reputation and we really promote this idea of doing more sustainable science externally. So if anybody's interested, there's a link there at the bottom of the page where you can see the full strategy. So just going into a bit more detail then, and sort of looking at how we've used comms to help us deliver that first pillar. Those top three projects that we can see on this chart, so the recycling rollout, the EMBL e-bike hub, and a thing called Leaf in Labs, we've really collaborated closely with Tabia and her team and the rest of the comms departments to have really effective imaging, really effective communications. And as we talked to our staff, this has all been done, you know, with a brand which we're calling Green EMBL. The next slide, Tabia, is then the second pillar. How do we promote our environmentally responsible research? And again, Tabia's team and the rest of the comms have really helped us to put on really great events, and where we've talked about the really relevant research that we're doing. We attended COP26 for the first time last year, and that was just invaluable to have really great sort of one-to-one conversations with a range of people that we've never spoke to before about this topic. And it was really enlightening to see actually the role that molecular life science, molecular biology could play to kind of tackling climate change, and the fact that at the moment it's a resource that isn't really being utilized. They also help us with publishing white papers and articles in different journals around. And again, they just help us to have really great content, really great images. I think that's probably it for that slide. Tabia, just conscious of time.
Thanks. Yes, conscious of time. Pillar 3 is how comms helps to promote sustainable science. So this is really more to almost traditional communications aspects. We do reporting in our annual report in various other journals. We do some outreach, including interviews, including examples, provision of material. We drive campaigns. We offer training. So Brendan and his team, they're going to visit the sites and really engage with different kind of groups across all EMBL sites. We promote the EMBL sustainable stories. Just one sentence on that, where we actually talk to the kitchen people, the gardeners, drivers, and make people visible who actually contribute as well as part of the scientific operations to achieve EMBL's goals. We all engage in the Heidelberg Sustainable Labs Forum, which is a local community, where we just had a webinar, for example, last month to talk about sustainability communications for researchers and how to drive behavioral change in science. And just a few visual examples how we try to aim and approach the communications holistically. It's always multi-channel, ranging from on the left hand side some basically big signage on campus to make this visible. We did brand our e-bikes as well, so just that we communicate via screens, we communicate via newsletters, and offer templates for all sites to really support the bottom-up approach and to use that really amazing vibes and activity to promote the overarching goals. Another example is Leaf, where Brendan and his team is really having a big change to support the idea of laboratory efficiency assessment framework. And the examples we show here on the left is as well that we always try to think about different touch points for various audiences. For example, on the left, it really was more the fun approach, right? It's postcards and stickers to raise awareness. Whereas in the middle, you see this is really already an indicator to help people with the decision, can I switch off that instrument or the machine or not? So this is really already more practical with regards to use. And then again, we kind of help to drive that campaign across different channels and all sites with various templates and materials. This is one example where we always try to aim, more audiovisual. We engage in social media, and I think Mathieu will share the link to that video we created on Earth Hour last day, where we, again, in collaboration with colleagues from all sides, generated that short video to engage and motivate people to switch off the lights for Earth Hour and keep raising an awareness and motivating people to drive change, behavioral change. And I hand over to Brendan.
Yeah, thank you, Tabia. So just to finish off, really, it's looking at the impact that we're starting to have and some of the results. So as part of our sustainability strategy, we've set these 5 long-term kind of organizational targets. so that we want to reduce our energy-based carbon emissions by 50% by 2030, as well as our business travel emissions. And that 50% reduction by 2030 is aligned with the Paris Agreement and its ambition to reduce or to limit global warming to 1.5 degrees. And then we also have targets for our waste management. So we want to have zero non-essential single-use plastic, reduce our total waste volume by 20%, and have a 90% recycling rate of residual waste, all by 2030. And I think target setting, again, is a really crucial part of communicating our strategy, because it gives something that everybody across the organisation can take part in and feel involved in and proud of the efforts we're making to try and reduce our impacts. And just for the latest figures, so for 2021, against our 2019 baseline, we've reduced our energy use emissions by 10.3%, our business flight emissions by 92%, but obviously in 2021 there's just a huge reduction in all travel, so we expect that will rise a bit, and also our waste generation has been reduced by 34%. So that's it. We've got a minute to spare.
Right, just on time. Thank you very much. Thank you both. Right, that concludes our session on the societal impact of research infrastructures. Can we thank all the speakers again here and remote?